Welcome to the MIT Industrial Liaison Program's Innovation in Management webinar series. I wish you, your families, your companies, and your respective communities all the best during these challenging times. My name is Stephen Palmer, and I am a program director in the Industrial Liaison Program. The Industrial Liaison Program serves as a gateway to MIT across all of campus for you to engage with researchers, faculty, and our respective startup community. This is the second of 4 sessions in the Innovation in Management webinar series. On the 22nd of May, last Friday, my colleague Jose Ramos hosted a wonderful session with Michael Cusimano and Luis Fidigare, now available for viewing on our website, ilp.mit.edu. The vision for this webinar series began when I recognized that the way we do business has changed. With the advent or innovation of technology, such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, quantum computing, etc., things have changed and it's impacted society, the economy, and its people. So I wanted to look at how it affected the workforce. And today I think is a perfect example of how we can address those issues with the research from Imran Sayeed and Stephanie Warner. These 2 faculty members are looking at employee and management focused models, given the increase in digital transformation. Each speaker will speak for approximately 50 minutes, followed by a Q&A. And there's a button at the bottom of your screen so you can submit questions during the course of the webinar series, and you can also vote on others' questions. There's a chat button that you can use for logistical concerns or questions as it relates to the logistics of the webinar series. Now for our first speaker, Imran Sayeed is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan. He has experience in industry, academia, and as an entrepreneur. His talk is titled Transforming Your Workforce to Win in the Digital Economy in the Current Pandemic. His research and frameworks are suited to help employees adapt and succeed in this current pandemic and recession. Imran will introduce a new employee-focused model that can help improve digital transformation outcomes. Imran, I'm thrilled that you could join us. Over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Hello everyone. Good to have everyone on this webinar. I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and get started. So as Stephen said, the topic of today's conversation is transforming your workforce to win in the digital economy and the current pandemic. And the impetus for this really came from our observations here at MIT over the last, decade plus, that companies spend, tens of millions of dollars on these digital transformations across all industries. And the primary focus of that investment is technology, business models, processes, tools, all of these things, and very little on the actual people, right? I mean, the most they'll do is they'll, provide some training for their employees. And what we found is that, that hasn't really been that successful, and we'll actually get into a little bit more details on that in a little bit. So that's what created the impetus to create this workforce transformation and innovation framework. That is this new model for employee-focused, approach towards digital transformation. So we're going to talk through the WTIF framework today. Take you through it, and also we've applied it over the last few years at multiple industries. We'll give you a couple of examples of industries where we have applied it and what we've seen in terms of results. Now, this research has been ongoing over several years, and it was primarily focused on digital transformation. But in this current, pandemic and sort of recession, what we realized is that the same framework and approach can be very useful for employees to, sort of succeed in this challenging time as well. So I'm going to spend the concluding part of the talk really talking about how we can use the same framework during this crisis as well. And I'm going to leave you with some, action items that you can use Monday morning. My talk isn't going to be a lot of slides because I want to get a lot of, interactive Q&As. So at any point, Stephen, if you see enough questions, feel free to interrupt, and we can get into some of the Q&A, because there's a lot of layers to this framework. I'm going to give you an overview, but I'd love to go down into detail wherever people have questions. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, all right. So the first is, digital transformation failure rate, right? So this is really interesting. McKinsey did a global survey of organizations working on digital transformations over multiple years. So did Forbes. And the results are pretty striking, right? McKinsey found that less than 30% of organizations that have embarked on digital transformations have seen an improvement in performance of their organizations. And when they add in an additional criteria, which is not just an immediate improvement in performance, but also the ability to sustain that performance, then that success rate actually goes down to 16%, which is what Forbes shows as well. The other thing that they noticed was that for more traditional industries, oil and gas, manufacturing, things like that, the success rate was even lower. It was anywhere between 4 to 11%. Right. So those are pretty dismal numbers, frankly, given the tens of millions of dollars that companies invest. Right. So why is that? Now, again, if we look at some of the keys to success, this is also from McKinsey, they found that these were sort of the top 5 keys to success, right? Having the right digital savvy leaders in place. I think Stephanie's talk right after mine is really going to focus on that part. So I'm not going to get into that much. The second one is building capabilities for the workforce of the future, right? And the third is empowering people to work in new ways, obviously giving them the right tools, digital tools, and then a lot of communication, obviously. Now, 2 of those, which is building capabilities for the workforce of the future and empowering people to work in new ways, really is workforce transformation, right? And what do they mean by that? So what building capabilities for the workforce of the future means is really poised to become more digitally savvy, to collaborate more, to have more of the growth mindset, versus a fixed mindset in terms of how they work. And I'll talk a little bit more about growth mindset down the road. So those are some of the things, right? And then empowering people to work in new ways. As we know, during digital transformations, the old way of working, isn't enough. And one of the interesting things they found is that they, found that employees who were invested in the success of the transformation, who also came up with ideas for the digital transformation, didn't just follow management's ideas. So there was some grassroots innovation, and then who, were sort of, engaged and excited about the outcomes, felt a lot more empowered and had, on average, if you focus on these 2 things, right, building the workforce of the future and empowering employees, they found that the success rate tripled if you do those 2 right? So just doing those 2 things out of the 5 gave you on average triple the success rate of the stats that we saw in the previous slide. All right, so clearly there's a reason for there's an important point around workforce transformation and its criticality in the success of digital transformations. Right. So why don't companies do more of it? Well, the challenge is that they think they are, right? And the way they do it is, one of typically the following approach, right? They'll do some training. They'll provide training in new technologies, big data, blockchain, artificial intelligence, cloud, whatever is important for that transformation, and then they'll do some talks around design thinking, right? So if you guys are familiar with design thinking, it's a framework for really sort of innovation and understanding your customers. It's got sort of 5 levels: empathize, redefine the problem, ideate, prototype, test, and so they'll do some training in that, and then this is the part that they always highlight, right? They'll create these fancy spaces with walls that you can write on, and chairs that you can move around and whatnot, and then they'll go and show employees, wow, look at this really cool approach. And unfortunately, that isn't really getting to the root of the problem. We find that approach often fails, right? So what we need to look at is a new model, right? And that new model is what we're going to be talking about today. So let's talk about the new approach, right? So first and foremost, what we find is that you need to establish trust with employees. Oftentimes what happens is that when you're in the middle of this digital transformation, there's a lot of questions that existing employees have. Am I going to have a job in this, once this company is transformed? Are my skills going to be obsolete, right? So, is management just looking to, give me a nice package or not even a nice package and show me out the door, right? So there's a lot of trust issues that come up. You need to establish trust. That's one. The second is you need to understand the employees' issues and concerns, right? You can't just sort of force this on them. As we saw in the McKinsey study, when employees feel, that they're collaborating, it's a lot more successful. So you need to really understand their issues and concerns at a sort of fairly fundamental and deep level, not just superficially. You also need to get employees invested in making the digital transformation work, not just, oh, well, management wants to do it, so we'll do it, but, whatever. I mean, we'll just sort of play along. They need to be genuinely excited and invested in making it work. It was interesting. One of the organizations that we were beta testing this framework with, when we first went there, we obviously talked to the employees and, apply this framework. And one of the things we got from them was like, oh yeah, management wants to do this whole digital transformation. It'll probably fail. They'll be shown out the door. We'll get new management in. I've been here 15 years. So nothing's really going to change for me. I'll just continue doing what I am and, wait for this thing to fail. So this is the mindset you obviously have to get out of, right? Then obviously giving them the tools to be innovative in their approach. So this part, some of the existing, training does do, but we need to do a better job of it. We'll talk a little bit about that. This other part is also important. Give them the confidence that they can do this transformation and that's okay to fail. Fail fast and iterate, right? So that confidence is really important. That's new as well. And then lastly, then after you've done all of these things, you provide the training on specific skills that are needed for the digital transformation, right? So you can see that the WTIF framework, has these 6 elements. 4 of them are new, right? 4 of them are elements that we haven't typically seen in a digital transformation, which is the established trust, understanding the employees' issues and concerns, getting employees invested in making the transformation successful, giving them the confidence, right? The other 2, the training and the providing tools organizations typically do, although like I said, that can be done better as well. So let's look at each of these things in place. Now, one interesting thing is, we were initially going to call this the Workforce Transformation Framework. Then we realized that the acronym was a little bit unfortunate. So we decided to call it the Workforce Transformation and Innovation Framework. That's hence the name WTIF. All right, so let's get into the first part, which is establishing trust. So, and this is and at every slide, you'll see where we are in the WTIF framework, right? So this is the sort of the base level. So the first thing about establishing trust is that typically our approach, the framework's approach, is that we appoint trusted advisors, right? Now, these, ideally, you want them to be people from outside of the company, not your HR department, but some folks who have a level of objectivity and aren't biased. And they're typically folks who understand corporate behavioral dynamics and understand the company's or the department's transformational programs. And what these trusted advisors do is that they lead a series of group exercises to break down barriers between management and employees, or build camaraderie between employees, and then understand grassroots challenges, with the transformation, right? Things that are not bubbling up, that are sort of, more fundamental issues. So it takes a series of efforts to build that trust, to do these exercises, but we find them to be incredibly successful, right? And then these TAs also set up one-on-one sessions for soliciting honest and confidential feedback. Now, once they've develop this trust, then we can get into understanding the issues and concerns of the employees in more detail, right? So this is the next item. And typically what we do is our framework looks across these 9 areas, right? The leadership team, what is the assessment of the employees' assessment of them? What are the concerns about them? Teamwork as they're working on the transformation together. Communication. We saw that in the McKinsey survey that communication is so important. How is that going? How does that need to change in the face of the transformation? Respect for employees, right? This becomes an issue, especially when you're acquiring new skills. Is management or even other employees valuing sort of the young, new folks with new skills more than the older employees, right? Older employees sometimes feel slighted, and that's not really good. Is the company working on professional development? Is there work-life balance, right? Is the company driving the employees to the ground, sort of burning them out because they have unrealistic deadlines on the digital transformation? So that's really important. Obviously, fairness and compensation come into this as well. I mean, if I'm learning new skills, am I going to be compensated for that? How is my performance, right? Feedback. And then to a certain extent, how does this all work with, sort of the social responsibility of the organization as we're moving towards a new digitally savvy, new economy organization? Are we going to just focus on the bottom line, or are we also going to look at our community and our society as well? So typically what we'll do is we'll, both do some group sessions, one-on-one exercises, as well as a survey around these areas. And the survey is very targeted, right? It really comes out of that first level of establishing trust, understanding the employees' issues, doing some of these group sessions. And because of that, what we find is that where on average, a typical employee survey will get anywhere from 25 to 30% responses. The surveys that we've done, once we've done the previous prerequisite steps, we get anywhere from 65 to 85% response rates, right? So significantly higher response rates as a result of doing some of the prerequisites first. Okay, so having done that and understood some of the issues, what we do is we compile the results into a numerical score, call it the workforce transformation score, and that really helps us both. There's a qualitative and a quantitative element to it, but the quantitative element tells us an idea of where the issues are at the organization and where they stand in terms of the engagement of the workforce in the success of this transformation, right? So it gives us a baseline from which to start. Now, after that, the next step is really important, right? It's kind of hard, which is, okay, you've understood the issues, you've understood the themes around where the concerns are. Now, how do you get employees invested in success, right? And this is a multi-step exercise. So this is the third layer of the WTIF pyramid, right? So the first and foremost is what we'll do is once we've got all the results from steps 1 and 2, we'll do some employee solutioning workshops. We'll say, okay, these are the themes that we saw. These are the concern areas that you guys brought up. Now we want you to not just, have gripe sessions, but also give us your feedback, right? Your ideas on how do we improve these, right? So you do these solutioning workshops. So what this does is that the employees now feel heard, right? But that's only one part of that step. The next step is you actually want to implement at least some of those recommendations, those top recommendations that make sense. This is a fairly interactive process between employees. On the one side, we're talking to them, getting their ideas, and then implementing the top recommendations. And seeing some of the results. What that does is that now the employees are feeling involved, right? The next step is you want to institutionalize that, right? So what we usually do is we establish employee councils where they now have an ongoing, sustainable way to provide those ideas on an ongoing basis, right? And that's what makes them feel empowered, right? So there's, feeling heard, feeling involved, feeling empowered. And then finally, those ideas that actually improve the engagement, improve the team dynamic, the the morale, the can-do attitude will, provide positive reinforcement through intrinsic rewards, right? More responsibility, some new titles, recognition, things like that. So now the employees are feeling recognized, right? And when you do all of these, that's when we feel that we find that employees really feel invested in the success of the digital transformation, right? So you have to follow sort of all of these approaches, right? First, make sure that they feel heard, make sure that they're feeling involved by implementing some of the recommendations, make sure that they're feeling empowered by institutionalizing it through these councils, recognize the folks who've really stepped up above and beyond, and then make sure that we recognize and celebrate those wins so that the broader employee base feels invested, right? So this is an incredibly critical part of the framework. Now, once we've done that, we get to the next stage, which is providing the tools for innovation, right? Ultimately, digital transformation is an innovative approach, and you want to make sure that employees have the right tools to be innovative, right? So yes, we will do the digital design thinking that the companies already do, but really do it in a more of an interactive manner. Teach them the fundamentals of that. That's really important. Also, I find that before we even get to design thinking, really sort of looking at growth versus fixed mindset, right, is really important. And that this is a foundational element. It's incredible. It seems like sort of obvious to folks, but when you have a growth mindset, you think of failure as a learning opportunity. You're always looking for new challenges. You realize you don't know everything, that you can always learn. And so you step up to the challenge. When you have a fixed mindset, people feel like, they feel threatened. They feel like they have to prove themselves to be the smartest person in the room. They are, they're fearful of bringing new ideas that they may not be strong in, right? These are all the things that make digital transformations fail. So it's really important to get employees over to a growth mindset. And so that's sort of probably the first thing we do. Then we get into the design thinking part. And then what we'll do is we'll also do a lot of case studies, right, of both successful and unsuccessful digital transformations and really sort of lead these group sessions to see with the employees, what worked, what didn't work, and really sort of understand. Let's see. Let's move forward. All right. So now the next step is, it's obviously useful to provide the tools, but this is another new step, right? Which is building the confidence in the ability to use the tools, right? It's one thing to provide the tools, but it's another to make sure that employees aren't, if you've learned something right, just now, you're going to not feel very confident in terms of using it. You're going to be hesitant, and you're going to be scared about what if you fail, right? So it's really important to do a series of exercises where employees have an opportunity to try out these new tools and techniques in a place where it's okay to fail, right? And it's in some ways celebrated because that's where they're going to get that confidence. So what we do is we do a number of things. One of my favorites is we do these innovation workshops where we bring employees together in a 2.5-hour session. Where we give them we go through the fixed and growth mindsets. We go through the design thinking framework, and then we give them a design challenge based on one of the burning issues within the existing digital transformation, and then tell them to apply some of these techniques to come up with innovative ideas. And then we'll make it fun. We'll break them up into groups. Each group will pitch an idea. We'll have some voting from the employees in terms of what's the most innovative ideas. We'll give out rewards, like nice little rewards, things like that. What we find with these sessions is not just that you get some really good ideas, but also even the people who don't win come back and say, "Wow, I had no idea I was capable of doing this. I thought I was just in HR. I thought I was just a developer. I didn't think I could innovate like this," right? So the confidence this builds is incredible. The other thing that you find with these is that you find these hidden gems within the organization, right? People who are buried in different parts of the organization who are incredibly motivated, innovative. And so, you discover them in this process, and then you can, provide them more leadership roles within the digital transformation. So we find that this to be incredibly useful as well. Now, another tool that another exercise we use for building confidence is hackathons, right? So you get some interesting ideas through these innovation workshops. You then go ahead and do either 1 day or 2 day hackathons where employees have a chance to actually take those ideas, quickly prototype them, right? So this is their ability to say, okay, this is not just theoretical. I can actually learn to quickly prototype or code or do some of these things. Again, an important thing about these hackathons is that you shouldn't just, management shouldn't just use them as a way to get new ideas developed. They should also use them as a way to train employees and to, again, build that confidence, right? So even if you don't get some great ideas coming out of it, if you've now trained employees, if they feel a lot more comfortable with the new technology that you're applying as far as the digital transformation goes, if they're more excited about it, then the hackathon has actually done its purpose as well. So that's an important mindset over there. And then lastly, one thing that I often stress, and this is part of a 3D innovation model that we've created here at MIT, is that don't just look at transformational innovation, look at incremental innovation, right? Small things that employees can do that provide immediate improvement in a process or whatnot. This is so important. It's such an important element of a digital transformation, because if you do enough of these small continuous improvements on a constant methodical basis, when you aggregate the sum, in many places we found that the sum of that has much more impact on an organization's digital transformation than waiting for that big bang, elusive, transformational idea. So incremental innovation is an incredibly important aspect of your overall digital transformation cycle. So these are some of the techniques that we use in terms of building confidence. There are many others out there as well, but I just wanted to give you some examples. But the idea with all of them is, make it fun, make it okay for employees to fail, because that's how they're going to get out of their comfort zone. They're going to apply new ideas and then move from there. All right. And then lastly, we get into the train part, right? Now, once you've done all of these other things, now you can get into, once you've sort of, established the trust, understood their issues, they're invested in success, they have the tools, they have the confidence. Now you can train them in the things that we need for the, the transformation to work. Now, here's the challenge on the training side, right? Unfortunately, what we've seen is that corporate training is kind of stuck in about 100 years ago, right? Where they're still providing either two forms of training. There's either, the in-person model, which is difficult for corporations that are globally dispersed, right? It's expensive, it's time-consuming, it's difficult to schedule people to come in one place. Or it's computer-based training, where typically, employees will sort of click through a computer-based module and then forget the work, right? So neither of those work. Fortunately, there are a lot more tools, techniques available now for training, right? There's personalized and adaptive training, where it's really personalized to the employees' abilities, what they're picking up, what they're slow at, and adapts to that style. There are massively open online courses, from places like Udemy, Udacity, Coursera, things like that, that provide you capabilities in just about every digital transformation topic that you want. There's a lot of social and collaborative tools that allow you to collaborate with employees around the world, with other organizations in your industry or outside of your industry. Obviously, this is really important right now where everyone is remote. Another one that we find very, very useful is gamified learning, where you have things like points, badges, leaderboards to sort of really motivate employees. We find that incredibly successful. Another one is micro-learning, right? So understanding that employees don't just go to long courses to understand something. Sometimes they just need to understand how, in this new digital transformation, this particular aspect of Microsoft Teams works, right? And so they need a 5-minute quick module on that, and then they can get to work, right? So micro-learning has to be emphasized as well. And then lastly, it's the separation of learning and credentialing, right? You shouldn't expect that the only way employees get the credentials for becoming an expert in Python is if they took a class and they passed the test and they, got the certificate, they may have just picked it up themselves. And as long as they can get credentialed in that somehow, then that should be fine too, right? So separating out the learning and credentialing is really important. So the point with this slide is that there are many different approaches to new approaches, incredibly effective approaches to training, and we need to be open to those versus our traditional model as well. We find that the new approaches are incredibly effective in doing a much better job of both personalizing the training and making it something that is internalized and remembered and sustained by the employees as well. Okay, so that's the framework in a nutshell. Now, what I'm going to do is spend a couple of slides really talking about what we've done is so far we've applied this in a number of industries. We've applied this in financial services, insurance, manufacturing, technology, transportation, and we've applied it both in the US as well as in Asia and Europe. So a number of different places. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of places where we applied it and some of the insights and results that we saw, right? And then we'll go into the pandemic part. Okay, so if there are any questions, we can pause right now. Otherwise, we'll continue. All right, so let's go ahead and continue then. So the first one is case study in the insurance space, right? So this was a regional, property and casualty company, about $20 billion in assets, that was going through a 7-year, $7 million digital transformation. And their goals were to provide new digital capabilities to existing clients, as well as to develop and expand into new products and geographies, right? Typical of a digital transformation in an insurance company. The issues that they were having was that they had outsourced a lot of the technology development to an outside vendor. And in fact, they've taken some of their employees and rebadged them for the outside vendor as well. Those employees were not performing. They weren't stepping up. The management also felt that the outsourcing vendor wasn't really providing the thought leadership they needed for the digital transformation to work. And so as a result, they were missing key milestones and the transformation was severely behind schedule. So we came in with the WTIF framework. And what we discovered is that, the sort of the base issue, right? When you get into that established trust and understand issues and concerns, we felt that the rebadged employees felt undervalued and neglected. They had this feeling that, okay, the company didn't want us, so they threw us away to the outsourcing vendor. And so why should we do any more than the minimal effort required? And the other thing was that there really wasn't an incentive program in place that rewarded out of the box thinking. It was, if you do something over and above, that's fine, but there really is no incentive for it. So that kind of came out of the, really applying those first two steps of the framework, right? Establishing trust, understanding issues and concerns. So then we went into, applying the rest of the framework and, really focusing on changing some of these concerns, investing in, getting the employees invested in the success, whatnot. And what we found is that in about a year, one of the things we focused on really was, really focusing on those rebadged employees, giving them the attention, giving them the training, giving them the incentives to, think out of the box with some of the tools that we talked about in the innovation part and the building confidence part, right? So that was the next sort of 4 levels of the WTIF framework. And what we found is that in about a year, we got 30% increase in innovative ideas coming from the team, right? Where previously the rebadged employees were checked out. We also created 50 new transformational leaders, right, from within the company, not the outsourcing vendor, who were sort of who were empowered to lead the transformational teams themselves. And we actually managed to get the program, 3 months ahead of schedule. So again, this is not a quick fix. It took really first understanding the underlying issues before you can actually start working on them. All right,
Imran.
Yes. Yes.
It's Steve. I'd love to see if we could start answering a couple of questions that have been asked, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So thanks so far. This is great. One of our first basic questions was, when you say we, who are you referring to? Are those colleagues at Sloan or others?
So some colleagues at Sloan, and then some researchers from outside of Sloan that I've been working with, and I'm actually going to give some acknowledgement to some of those folks at the end of the talk as well. So there's a combination of some research at MIT, both with colleagues, with some students, as well as folks from outside.
Okay. Thank you. And then with regards to employee councils, they're a great first step. And one of our participants says it feels a bit like giving breadcrumbs when people deserve the whole loaf. What are your thoughts on co-determination, employee representation on boards, to fully embrace the idea of employee versus voice and recognition?
So, I mean, the thing is that it's not just having the employee council, right? It's making sure that the employee council is empowered to bring ideas on a ongoing basis, and that management makes a commitment to addressing those problems. They may not agree to implement them, but they'll always come back in a timely manner and say, yes, this makes sense, we're going to implement it, and here's the time frame, and here's how you can measure us, or no, we're not going to implement it, and these are the reasons why, right? Just doing that part, we find, has an incredible effect in terms of employees feeling empowered versus, they'll give some ideas, they'll never know where they went, or they don't even have the opportunity to give those ideas, or employees will say, yeah, we'll do it, and then they'll never hear back again, right? So just doing those steps that I talked about has an incredibly empowering effect. Now, obviously, you can go beyond that. You can have more representation at senior levels as well, but just these steps we found to be incredibly effective.
Right. No, that's great. And then follow on to that, somebody had asked what your thoughts were about having employees on a board to, again, to hear their voice.
This is a difficult one, right? I mean, we have employees on boards in Europe. That's standard practice on supervisory boards. You have employees, and that seems to work. Traditionally, that hasn't happened in the US, and I haven't seen that much in Asia either. There's two modes of thinking around this. One is the German side is, yes, we want employees because we want to understand their concerns. The second one is that we want the board to be an objective outside party that doesn't have any vested interest in the, in either the management side or the employee side, and is really looking at, all of the stakeholders in an objective fashion. And that's more of the current thinking over here. I'm not an expert on board composition, but I've seen both of those models, work. I think it's more about making sure that, as we said, that the employees themselves are engaged, and that we have the right tools and techniques and frameworks in place to empower them. How far that empowerment goes is something that can be discussed, but many places we've seen that basic level of empowerment doesn't even happen.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks. Maybe just a couple more, and then I'll get you back to the second case study.
Sure.
It's a sort of a cultural question. How has your framework responded in different cultures? High touch versus more of a passive one. Has there been a difference?
Yes, it's really interesting. You bring that up. I've actually done parts of the framework. I've led the innovation workshop, right, which is one of the aspects of the framework, in 40 cities across 6 continents. So everywhere from Beijing to Bangalore to Barcelona to Boston. And what we find is that the basic concerns of employees, the basic way that they respond, right, their enthusiasm, their level of confidence about being able to innovate is exactly the same. I thought it would be quite different, right? So the mechanism of teaching might be a little bit different. There's some language concerns, there's some cultural things you have to be concerned about, but the reaction from the employees is remarkably consistent. And I literally, like I said, 40 cities around the world, and this has been my findings of that.
Right. No, thank you. And the last one before I'll get you back to it is, do you think that a progressive transition between the old ways and the new digital instruments is a necessary thing? Some transitional period where it is acceptable for the employee to use the tools they want to do their job as opposed to the new system.
Right. So again, the idea with this WTIF framework is that we want to get employees into the frame of mind where they're excited about trying new things, and that it's okay to fail, right? That's why that providing the tools and then building the confidence for them is really important, because once they have the growth mindset and they have the confidence that it's okay to fail, then they're going to be a lot more willing to try new things out. And even if they fail, they'll be like, okay, you know what? We learned something from that. Let's try something different, right? Versus if you don't do those things, then people want to cling on to something in the past and say, well, I'm comfortable using this tool. Why don't I use it a little bit longer, right? And that's not addressing the root of the problem. That's just putting, a superficial, band-aid on top of it, right? So if you can get to the root, which is that, that desire to learn and the confidence to fail, then you're not going to have that problem.
Okay, thanks. All right, back to you, Imran. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So let's go to the next case study, which is in the finance space. So this was a student loan agency servicing about 500 billion in loans. There's a quasi state agency, so public-private partnership. They're in the middle of a 5-year, $100 million digital transformation, and the goals were to expand their offerings, to focus beyond just to provide new services to students beyond just loans, and also avoid getting disrupted by the fintech startups that were approaching their customers, right? I mean, the fintech space, as we know, is really hot. There's a lot going on in there. So that was sort of their goals of the digital transformation. The issues that we had in there was that, first of all, the transformation was entirely dependent on outside consultants, right? They'd had a very strong employee base that had been there for an average tenure was 15 years, right? 15 to 20 years. And they knew the business processes very well, but all of the new technology and the transformation was being led by outside consultants. And so the agency, was facing a lot of backlash, both from employees and then also political backlash, where there was a lot of speculation saying, well, what's going to happen to these old employees? Are they just going to be outsourced, downsized, and new people are going to come in, right? So there's a lot of turmoil in the organization around this transformation. But at the same time, it had to be done because you had these fintechs jumping at the bit, and these guys had to look for new growth opportunities. So, applying the WTIF framework, what we found is, again, the first thing you do is get to the underlying issues, right? The underlying issue was the severe lack of trust between management and employees, right? These employees who'd been there for 15, 20 years were convinced that all management was doing was, biding their time to make sure that, this transformation was done by young, new people with new skills, and that these guys were just going to be let go, right? That there was no interest in investing in them, in training them, in recognizing their strong understanding of the student loan business, of the processes and whatnot, right? So that was the underlying issue across everything else that we saw, right? So what we had to do was really focus on that. So, like I said, with things like, understanding their issues, investing in the employee councils, taking some of their ideas, and then more importantly, actually doing a series of, innovation workshops, providing them the tools to build their confidence, recognizing some of their initiatives and actually implementing them made a world of difference. This was actually in 6 months, you saw the employees' confidence grow, right? People were sending us sort of these almost like love letters, saying, oh my God, I've been here 20 years and I've never felt like I could, do something new. Management never wanted me to do something new. They always pigeonholed me into what I was good at. And you guys have now given us the opportunity to try this. I feel like a new person. I'm so energized, right? So that resulted in the employees getting a lot more engaged in the transformation versus the consultants. And that automatically led, and because the employees understood the business processes so much better than the consultants, it led to a 30% reduction in time to market for the team deliverables. So on an ongoing basis, what we found is that employees started making more of the key technical decisions, and that engagement transferred over. We checked back with that team a couple of months ago, and during the whole transition during the COVID crisis and the moving to remote workforce, they really got 0% loss of productivity. People were just continued working; they were just as engaged, and so that had sort of spillover effects as well, which like I said, I'll talk about on the pandemic side. So that's another example. But again, the thing is, you're not going to discover those if you just did the standard technique, right? You provided some training in new technologies, you provide those fancy office spaces, and you did some design thinking framework. You really have to get to this underlying causes. All right. So I've talked, as I said, quite a bit about the role of the WTIF in digital transformation. I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about how it can help with the current pandemic recession, because that's the need of the hour at this point, right? So typically, what happens in what's happening right now, right? We have a major crisis, right? A pandemic, one of the biggest we've seen in 100 years. And typically what happens in a crisis like that, right? You have business operations are disrupted. You have widespread fear, which if it is in control can create panic. It's difficult to concentrate on work. And then we have a recession, right? And in the recession, we have, typically spending and investment is significantly reduced by individuals, organizations, governments, which is why sales and revenue typically go down in organizations, as well as their assets, right? Their financial assets in an insurance company, the real estate assets, all of those take a hit, right? So what do, corporations traditionally do, right? Before we get into the traditional response, right? When you have both, right? We're talking about a dual calamity. You have both a pandemic and a recession going on at the same time. And by the way, they're both global, so it's not just limited to one market. What happens is that everything in a crisis and a recession happens, right? All the things we talked about in terms of, disruption and lower investment, and it reinforces each other, right? And it can create existential threats for companies and even entire industries, as we're seeing today as well. Now, the traditional response of organizations is to increase, focus, right? They will focus intensely for the duration of the crisis, all hands on deck, so create this shared sense of purpose, 24/7 execution, create a shared sense of urgency. And then for recession, they'll reduce costs, limit investments, so there'll be that focus on the bottom line as well. What we find is that when you have a global pandemic and recession together, this dual calamity at the same time, that response is not enough, right? Just by focusing more and by, working harder and reducing investments, Marriott, or I'm just taking an example, is not suddenly going to start thriving in this market when the entire hospitality and travel industry has been, so disrupted, right? They need to step back and think about being more innovative. They need to do all of these things, but they need to also, step back, and they need to reevaluate, the value proposition to market, right? What is the value proposition of our company to the market? Do our products and services make sense? Do the way we work currently make sense, right? Roles and processes. We've seen a lot of that with working from home, but also other processes that may not have, been important before. And in some cases, what does the brand stand for, right? Now, traditionally, this kind of sort of radical reimagination, the biggest impediments to that is that, there's not enough buy-in from the top, there's cultural resistance to change, there's lack of urgency, and most importantly, there's decent financial performance. Hey, if you're doing well, our stock is going up, why bother with all of these things, right? That's usually the thing. Now, what we find is that today, none of those things apply, right? So we do need organizations, if they're going to handle this dual calamity, they need to do those steps, the reevaluation, right, of products, services, ways of working, what they stand for. But they're not going to do that without having a workforce that is, that has, first of all, trust in their management. They're not just going to lay them off at the first signs of a recession, that they're not going to just, sideline them and do their own thing. They need a workforce that's engaged, that has trust in management, that is invested in the success of the response to the pandemic, and is there, and then has the tools, right? The tools to think innovatively, the confidence to try those innovative approaches, and the the skills that are needed to actually implement this, right? So that's where the WTIF framework we found has been really useful. And like I said, while we haven't specifically tried it here, that example I gave you of the student loan agency is a very good example where, we just finished this this exercise with them about back in December. And so we saw the results of that, where they all came together and they're looking at both new ways of working as well as new approaches to new products and services. They actually pivoted and created a new product around, helping colleges that they work with provide social distancing capabilities. And they pivoted and created that in about 2 weeks, right? Which would never have been possible in the past. So that's the point of, where I was saying that the what if can be really useful in a pandemic recession of the sort. Okay, so wrapping it all up together, let's look at Monday morning action items, right? There's a lot over here that you've learned. Now, how can you apply this, Monday morning, right? What are the actions you can do? First and foremost, identify a key burning issue with your digital transformation that is perhaps exacerbated by today's current pandemic or recession, right? So let's take one issue that's a huge burning issue that's causing severe problems. Identify a group of employees or teams that could address this issue, They might not be addressing it today, but that are in a good, and then we apply the What If framework on that team with an emphasis on quick wins, right? We're in a market right now, we're in a pandemic where we can't wait for 2 years, right? We have to do something quick. So apply the framework, identify and address the top issues, train the team, and then, train the teams with the best potential on the What If framework, right? Measure the results in 3 to 6 months. We should be able to see results, and then we can expand the focus on longer term, more transformational benefits. So that's a way that you can take this framework and apply it to what you're, looking at today. So in closing, just some concluding thoughts. As I said earlier, this was work that was done not just by myself, my fellow researchers, in particular, I want to call out Noreen Miraj and Vivek Mehra, who really helped me with this, as well as the many companies that agreed to beta test this framework, right? I mean, we didn't suddenly come up with all these insights. It was an iterative process as we built out the framework. So I really want to thank those many corporations that helped us over the last few years building it out. If you'd like an infographic of this framework, please send an email to this email address, info@digitalinnovationinc.com. This is a advisory company that I do some of this work with, and they're kind enough to put together a infographic that they can send this out to. And lastly, we're looking for more industry collaborators, right, to test and refine this, the What If framework more. So if you're interested in collaborating, you can send me an email, and we're happy to have that discussion with you. This is just like we talked about with the growth mindset. This is a framework that continues to evolve, and we'd love to get more inputs from different size companies, different industries, different geographies, etc. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if there are any more questions.
Yes, Imran, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. And there's been a number of questions. I've tried to group some of them. One of the main ones you just answered was, how can we work with you? How can we use this framework? So I think you provided your email, as well as the participants can connect with ILP, and we can put you in touch.
Right.
One of them, one of the themes was, just trying to reach my notes here, how much of the digital transformation budget should be dedicated to employee transformation, and how does the overall digital transformation connect with the workforce transformation? So you're sort of...
Very good question, right? What we found is that, again, typically, as I said at the very beginning, most of the budget is focused on technology, on tools, on business models, on business processes. Companies will allocate maybe 10% if they're lucky, sometimes even less. And what we find is that you want to allocate at least a third of your budget towards towards employee transformation, because ultimately the employees are the ones who are going to make it succeed or not. I mean, we've seen not just the results from my side, but even McKinsey's survey has said the same thing, right? Just focusing on those two workforce transformation aspects triple the success rate. So it is woefully underfunded. And so that's a really good question. We need to change that mindset.
And with regards to the results, the data, when you're measuring your results, some have asked, what is the percentage of employee willingness versus management willingness? Is there a difference there? Do you find that the delta between how much an employee is willing to adopt, or is it the management adopting the fact that they have to transform?
Yeah, that's again great point. At the obviously the management has to first buy in, right? And they'll buy in because they're seeing their current transformation not working, right? And they're kind of at a loss to why, because they've put all the right tools and everything. So obviously management buy is important. But having said that, when we go in and start working with these organizations, management is bought in at that point. They've allocated budget towards this, but there's an incredible distrust and cynicism from employees saying, is this even going to work? Why should I bother? Whatnot. So that's where that first, 3 steps, really sort of building trust, understanding the issues, getting them invested is so important. Without those, all the other, elements are not going to work. And that takes a lot of effort.
So are these team building dynamics and trust building exercises based in digital transformation, or are they sort of the same sound team dynamics and building that you would do otherwise?
So the underlying concepts are the same in any kind of employee engagement, although the work that I've done in the employee engagement side has been a little bit different. A lot of the times what I find is that employee engagement focuses on things like, do you have a friend at work, or, silly questions like that, versus, really getting to the roots of the problem. But yes, what we do is, in this case, we adapt the issues to the digital transformation specifically.
Okay. And then one final question before we end, Imran. In large companies that you're trying to gather data, maybe 50,000 and plus employees, what are some of the tools that you've found successful to gather their feedback?
So again, what we find is that this often works best if you do it not as one big exercise. You start with a division or department that's often leading the transformation that needs to happen first. And then we see some success, and then we roll it out more progressively. Now, the tools that we're using, right, the employee survey tools, things like that, are very scalable. Even the training techniques and whatnot, especially nowadays with remote learning, the training tools I talked about have a lot of expansion capabilities. But we find that starting with a smaller group works better than doing a wholesale approach, because you get a lot of better chance to interact one-on-one with employees and understand those key concerns.
And that's actually, it leads me to my last question. Does that help then with how management receives, or I'll even say a company in general, receives your WTIF framework? There has been some hesitancy by companies, to pull back the curtain.
Absolutely. One of the things that we stress with management is when we get the results of the findings, right, in the first 3 steps, there's often like a shock, right? Well, I don't think that's the case. I don't think employees think that about us. And we're like, well, they do. So, if we're going to change, you have to take an honest assessment and take this constructively. And, this doesn't mean that this can't change, but this is where you are at, right? So if you're getting this low score, it's not that because we're trying to punish you, it's because that's the state of the workforce right now. And that's why your digital transformation is, 2 years behind schedule and not going the right way. So yes, there is a lot of sort of coaching of management that has to be done so that they take the results in the right approach, so that they want to build on it versus a defensive pullback. Very good point.
Imran, thank you very much for your time today. I learned a lot, and hopefully our participants as well. And if they want to connect with you, I look forward to them learning from your frameworks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.